Hello, friends, and welcome to the January 27th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week I have to give a special thank you to our Executive Director, B. Moorhead, for filling in for me while I was out sick. She had a chance to sit down with Maria Coyne, President and CEO of the United Church of Christ Cornerstone Fund. They discussed legacy giving and how faith-based funds like Cornerstone can work with congregations to engage in and support justice ministries through the wise use of buildings and other real property. I was sad to miss, but it worked out well since B currently serves on the Cornerstone board. I don't think she was happy I was sick, but I'm sure she enjoyed the opportunity. And the episode is well-timed because literally hours after the conversation was recorded, Texas Impact received word that we're going to be a significant beneficiary of one of those legacy gifts, thanks to the generosity and vision of Lord of Life Lutheran Church, an Austin congregation that is closing their doors this spring and chose to include Texas Impact as a beneficiary of their legacy giving. Before we get to B's conversation with Maria, we've got a couple quick announcements. First, I'm looking forward to the United Women in Faith Legislative Conference in Austin and online January 29th through 31st. For the first time ever, this event has sold out in person. If you happen to be listening to this podcast before the event, you can still get tickets for the virtual event on Eventbrite. If you miss legislative event, don't worry, there will be more opportunities to work for justice at the Texas Capitol, including Texas Interfaith Advocacy Days, February 19th through 21st. Make sure that you're signed up for the Texas Impact e-news at texasimpact.org so you don't miss any of our upcoming events. While you're there, click on Join a Team to find other ways to connect with Texas Impact and other advocates of faith. So with that, enough announcements for today. I hope you enjoy the Weekly Witness conversation with Maria Coyne.
Well, Maria, thanks for joining us for our podcast. I am not usually the interviewer on this podcast. I'm usually the person being interviewed if I'm on it at all. So this is a new experience for me.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, so I think the first thing is for you just to explain a little bit about what the Cornerstone Fund is, and maybe a little bit how it's related to similar funders in other denominations around the country.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. The Cornerstone Fund is a financial institution that's known as a church extension fund. And basically what it means is that we sell investments to individuals and churches and other faith-based organizations at above market rates, and then we turn around and we lend that money to churches and other faith-based organizations. I mean, truly our mission is joining together in faith to invest in and build community. So a lot of what we do is basic maintenance on faith-based organizations' properties, but in many cases it's reuse, creative reuse, and sometimes leave behind legacy projects for certain organizations.
Say what you mean by a leave behind legacy project.
So we've all heard about churches and the decline in the number of churches and the number of people worshiping in churches, and you can see that as a negative. We tend to see it as a positive because we think of a resurrecting church where a church can determine a use for their property that leaves something in that community that they need, whether it's a senior center, a daycare center, affordable housing, mixed-use retail in a place where there aren't services available. We've seen many, many creative uses and reuses of church property.
Tell a little bit about where Cornerstone is physically located. Are you in a building that you own, or how many staff members do you have? What's it like?
We are a small but mighty team of about a dozen people, and we are in an office building in Cleveland, Ohio, but our business is nationwide, And we are registered to sell securities in all 50 states and finance projects in all 50 states. And we love the work we do. We're amazing in terms of people's backgrounds and what they bring to the fund. And that's what we do.
So I know there have been some changes over the past couple of decades in the backgrounds that people bring into their work as pastors or religious professionals. Do you feel like that's true in the financial side as well? Do you feel like there are the people that are on, for example, Cornerstone's team are bringing skill sets that wouldn't have come into the nonprofit sector in the past?
Absolutely. I mean, so starting with myself, I had over 30 years in retail and commercial banking. And we have a director of lending who was an oboist. And we have, our chief lending officer had a background in impact investing and, deep financial experience. We're just really blessed with some of the folks that we have on our team that have come because they believe in the mission and enjoy the work, and they really do a terrific job.
Have you seen an increase over the past, say 10 years, in congregations having a specific social justice focus in the way, whether it's reuse or continuing to use the building for worship? Is social justice an increasingly common theme?
Most definitely. And projects specifically focused around climate care, immigrant and refugee populations, providing assistance to them, providing affordable housing, providing care for seniors. All of these things are things that are kind of front and center. And we always say when we start a conversation with a client we really try and understand what their mission is, what their focus of their ministry is, and then we tailor the property to be able to deliver against that mission. So it's always good to understand, many times people are focused on food. So there'll be food pantries and there'll be commercial kitchen, which they make available to training ground and for other uses. So it really all does start with kind of what's your mission, and social justice issues are certainly front and center these days.
Do you see any distinction or difference in the way that younger congregations might see their building use compared to the way maybe older, more established congregations do?
There is a difference. There's a degree of emotion that older congregants tend to attach to their building in a way where it's almost a tad too inwardly focused, whereas younger members of a church tend to see it more as a place that they go to have community, but it doesn't have to be that place. And we talk a lot about church the verb versus church the noun to try and get people away from being so focused on the building and get more focused on what the impact they're having in their community is.
What's an example? I was going to ask you, what's the most interesting example of redevelopment by a congregation that's still in the building? I guess picking one would probably be rough, but what's an interesting or a couple of interesting examples?
Sure, there's a couple of interesting ones. We helped a church take an old 2-story fellowship hall and turn it into 12 units of transitional housing for returning citizens. That was amazing. We didn't think you could do a 12-unit property and kind of make it work, but everything really aligned beautifully, and that worked out great. We've seen churches form partnerships with other nonprofit organizations and share space, completely flexible space where it could potentially be a place you worship on Sunday, but a place you have yoga class on Monday and art classes on Wednesday evening and so forth, that kind of thing. We have seen churches sell a building and have the building torn down and then a new structure built, but the church has space within the building and is still able to continue their ministry and their presence in that community.
Do you have any advice for congregations as they're thinking about next steps for their building, whether it's relatively minor, like deciding whether to repair or replace some specific part of the building, or whether it's one of these things like tear the whole building down and start from scratch? Do you have any advice for the process a congregation should go through to make those determinations?
I think it's really important to have the right partners and understanding who that partner might be in that circumstance. So we did have another church that wanted to build something in an adjacent building that they had, but the building was very old and in very bad disrepair. And they had plans for how they were going to redevelop this building. And we said, well, before we go too far, before we go down the path with the architect, we had them hire a structural engineer who simply came in and said, this is not the building you want to put money into. And I think that that's just one example, but having the right partner is super critical. Having the right, even your lay leaders, having the right sets of skills to be involved with different projects is super helpful. But churches shouldn't try and do things on their own, particularly if it's going to involve construction or other things. No one is trained to work in that field. You're trained in ministry. So I think it's really important that churches get the right partners, identify what their needs are, and really over-communicate in terms of having their congregations involved. You can never say things enough times for people to feel included and feel like they really understand what's going on.
Have you ever had experience doing a project where you felt like the congregation wasn't included early on and there were negative consequences?
Absolutely. There was a lot of dissension. There wasn't, it was difficult for the church to raise the capital that they wanted in their capital campaign. And it also just didn't bode well for the success of the project. So it's really important that you take the time to do that. There's always a range of emotions involved when people are making decisions around the future of a community, but it's worth taking the time and having the process of discernment available so that people feel very included.
Do you feel like clergy, maybe especially younger ones who are coming out of seminary, are getting prepared to be part of redevelopment or reimagining of church buildings?
That has really come on the scene the last couple of years, and I'm hopeful. I think many seminaries are talking about that now and talking about, for the longest time we would always wish that there was more financial and business acumen that was taught in seminary because it's not something that's really a part of the curricula normally. But increasingly there's a lot of awareness, I think, about if you're coming out to pastor, there's kind of a business aspect to it as well, and that you need to be prepared for not just, making these types of decisions and surrounding yourself with good partners, but also being able to shepherd your congregation through a decision-making process.
I guess the one other question that I would have, thinking kind of on the flip side, so Cornerstone, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how other building and loan funds work, but on some level, they're entities that depend on people putting money into them in the first place, and so it's either in the form of bequests or making investments or whatever. What's your pitch to somebody who was thinking about making a bequest or an investment into Cornerstone or another building and loan fund? Why would you tell them it's an important use of their financial resources at this time?
That's a great question, because it really is so important, because it allows us to continue to kind of build the kingdom here on earth. I mean, it's a difference between enriching a shareholder and enriching the life in your own community. I mean, you can get good results and do good at the same time, which is differentiating. And it's really important to know that your dollars, while you're earning money on them, are still being used for good. And you can see tangible results as opposed to, potentially a kind of anonymous financial institution.
So you mentioned creation care earlier as one of the kinds of social justice ministries that Cornerstone and other building and loan funds could help congregations with. How has the Inflation Reduction Act and the availability of all the new information and buzz about solar, how is that changing Cornerstone's work?
It's been a big boon to the efforts that we've already had underway in terms of helping churches reduce their carbon footprint. We're super excited about the IRA and the impact that it could have on churches doing solar in particular. And our team, I know, has taken the time to get kind of good state by state, because every state, there are slightly different programs available for solar in particular, but not just solar, but heat pumps and HVAC systems and LED lighting and all the ways that green roofs, all the ways that you can improve your carbon footprint. We're doubling down on being able to help finance those. We've got some special lending programs specifically related to creation care. And as I mentioned, the solar piece in particular, we've seen churches doing a lot of interesting things, not just with solar on their own church, but investigating providing community solar as well.
Would you say at this point, any church that's doing any major project should be putting creation care into the mix from the beginning?
You bet. That's a question we ask every single time somebody starts a new project, especially when they come to us with a roof project, because we're up there. It'd be pretty easy for us to put some solar panels in while we're up there. But anything, you even just putting your HVAC system on timers will have a huge impact, not just on, the environment, but also in terms of cost savings. So it is something that we bring up virtually any time and with any type of project as something you should consider.
Are you able to factor future energy savings, like you say, with the HVAC on timers and LEDs and other things like that? Are you able to factor those savings into the financing of the project?
For sure. In fact, we just completed one project where the congregation estimated that they would achieve break even in 18 months, and then everything after that would be pure savings.
Have you seen a trend toward congregations doing that community solar in a particular racial justice or economic justice frame? Like, are they working to get solar into low-income communities?
Definitely. A focus on low-income communities and immigrant populations and places where it wouldn't typically be available. A big focus there, for sure.
Have you gotten any pushback from congregations or from communities where they're located in advancing this idea of creation care?
I think it's more an apprehension of kind of not knowing where to start, right? Like, who's the right contractor? Do we have to find investors ourselves? All those types of questions. That's where we would walk with you on that process. And it's more a fear of the unknown and kind of not knowing where to begin. But once we break it down and kind of take it one step at a time, and people get much more comfortable with the idea.
Do you have any resources for congregations that might be interested in creation care building improvements?
We've done a couple of webinars, which you can find recorded on our website, which is cornerstone.org and cornerstonefund.org. Sorry, and we're working with others as who have other resources that they provide, and we've got links and things like that on our website as well.
Great. So Is there any difference that you've been able to see so far? I mean, I know the IRA is really just rolling out, but are there some states where you can already see that there's huge uptake versus others where maybe there's not so much?
That's very true. So there are some states who've been a little ahead of the curve in terms of making solar easier to implement and more attainable. And frankly, that's kind of where we focused first, because for us to understand one state at a time, you really want to get one well understood before you move on to the next. But there are certainly states where there are, and it changes every day, right? But more programming and more support available.
Is there anything you would leave our listeners with that's your advice to them or your request to them if they're going to consider doing a building project?
Well, I would request that you start well in advance of when you think you actually have to be actively involved in the building. And really, again, surround yourself with good partners. The reason that working with a Cornerstone or another church extension fund makes a lot of sense is that these are the only types of projects we finance. And we understand, and we'll stick with you, and we'll walk down that road with you, particularly if you hit a bump in the road. So it's really important, again, to assemble the right team, and that includes the right people that are going to help you figure out the financing of whatever project you do.
Thank you so much for being with us on the show. I really appreciate it. And we're big fans of the Cornerstone Fund and all of the denominational building and loan funds.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.
Thanks.
Once again, thank you to B for filling in and Maria Coyne for joining us on Weekly Witness. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it helped you think about how your congregation is leveraging your physical property for the work of justice in your community and beyond. As you can see, there are many resources available to help you in that work. We're at the beginning stages of the Texas Legislature's 140-day session, and we look forward to resourcing your advocacy and justice work during the session. I look forward to your questions or suggestions. Feel free to reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. And as we wrap up, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and are sharing it with your friends and congregations. So go to texasimpact.org for other ways you can get involved during the legislative session. While you're there, make sure you and your congregation sign up to be members of Texas Impact and support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. We are in the middle of our membership drive, so this is an important time to do that. And with that, I think it's time that we close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.